Wow, it makes you kind of feel like a computer program a little bit.
It's possible, yeah.
Let's take a call. We've got Lynn in Arizona. Lynn, you're on Late Night in the Midlands.
Hey, this
Hi.
is a really fascinating program. Thank you so much for having this guest. I have a question related to the book of Genesis. Between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there are theories that a whole lot of time took place between those two events. And one of the theories is that the first account, Genesis chapter 1, is actually those fallen angels that you're talking about, because they're described as Elohim. And then the Genesis chapter 2 is when God, Yahweh, created man, And so I was wondering if you could flesh that out a little bit and maybe give some time, a possible, time lapse between those, what kind of time frame we're talking about. And also you mentioned the fact that we are going to have a global ruler again, which I infer means that at one time you believe that the world was under some kind of global leadership.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could also clarify that.
I'll do that quickly. I believe I'm not sure about the world before the flood, but I believe in order to ultimately their plan of the fallen angels is to raise an army to fight against God. And the only way to have that an effective fighting force against such a powerful being, if not to defeat him, at least to limit his ability to control them. I think that's ultimately their intention, is to maintain their freedom. They don't think they can necessarily defeat God, but they could try to maintain their freedom for as long as they can. In order to do that, effective fighting force, they'd have to be under a single mind. And I think this is one of the secrets of the object underneath the Sphinx. It's such a powerful computer, it could literally control an entire army of people. So, and Jesus also said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. One could deduce parallels from the time before the flood to the time of the second coming. Roughly, if not the same, pretty similar events are going to be happening. Similar flows of power, and ultimately similar, events and people will be reappearing as they had in the world before the flood. It's kind of a cycle. So I think something still there was probably an Antichrist figure before the flood, as there will be at the time of the second coming. It's a reasonable assumption, I think. Regarding the period of time between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, that is actually called the gap theory, I believe you're referring to, where there was an indeterminate amount of time between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and God created the heavens and earth, and the heavens and earth were void. So there's some theologians think that there's an explanation of what appears to be a very ancient universe, and that there is a long period of time in between those two verses. My theory is that Genesis 1:1 actually describes not the creation of the universe, but the creation of earth in its present form. This is Genesis 1:1 actually says not created, but actually cut heaven and earth. The word is bara, to cut. So it literally says, in the beginning, God cut apart the heaven and the earth. This presupposes a pre-existing planet, a large body from which earth could be cut. And this corresponds perfectly with Sitchin's theory of the planet X striking earth with one of its satellites, dividing it into heaven and earth. This is what the Babylonians thought too, and the Bible. So in order to have a division of heaven and earth into two separate pieces, you have to have a pre-existing object. This was, I believe, the primordial Earth, which orbited in the solar system between the current orbit of Mars and Jupiter, where the asteroid belt is now. And the heaven, or at least one of the heavens, I believe the second heaven of the three heavens, is actually the asteroid belt. And so they're saying literally here in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the asteroid belt in the earth. As a result of this divine conflict in heaven, when earth was divided and moved to another position. And that's why it says in Genesis 1:2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The word Spirit of God literally means the wind of God. And this corresponds in the Babylonian creation. I think Marduk used what he called a wind to move earth to a new location closer to the sun. I believe this is, and the word moved here literally is the term. Moved upon a face of water literally means brooded upon, like a bird broods upon her eggs. The process of brooding actually involves rolling an egg in order to keep it warm. I believe what God did when he divided the earth into two pieces, he also moved the larger part towards the closer to the sun, rolling it like a mother bird rolls its eggs so that they can be warm. God moved the earth closer to the sun so it could be warmer. So it would be warm enough to support the kind of life he planned to build on it, to place on it. If Earth were a little bit farther closer to the sun, it would be too hot to support life. A little bit farther out, it would be too cold. Earth is in exactly the right position it needs to be in order to have the exact right temperatures in order to support life. And this is what they're talking about in Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Genesis 1:1 says, God divided heaven and earth and moved earth close to this. And Genesis 1:2 says, God moved this larger part of this divided planet, which used to orbit out farther out in our solar system, where the asteroid belt is now, closer to the sun so it will be warmer. And then after a while, he removed the canopy of vapor and of dust from the earth so that the sun could once again shine upon the earth's surface, and that's when the light appears. And it says in Genesis 1:3, and God said, "Let there be light." Not that the light was formed in the universe. This literally means that light now shined once again upon the face of this newly created earth, which was formed from this old earth. And so, and I believe that didn't take place over necessarily millions of years. But the morning and the evening referring to here is not a single solar day, but actually a 2,000-year solar orbit of planet X. Every time planet X came around once again, God did additional work on the earth, further refinements, until after the end of the 7 days, it was complete. And that is my theory. God used planet X to form Earth in its present form, using an initial collision and afterwards planting a life on it so that it could grow over a period of 2,000 years and populate the Earth. It's about the right time, too.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Wow.
It's all in my book, Planet X. It's all in my book, Planet X, the Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age. It's all about how the Planet X theory solves all the questions about the creation and the nativity and also the end times. The questions regarding all those things are neatly tied together and all makes perfect sense.
Oh, my goodness. Can I ask one more question, and then I'm going to thank you. Sure. It definitely is. I'd like to ask one more question, and then I'm going to hang up. Do you believe that the descendants of the Nephilim and these other hybrid alien/human beings are existing on the Earth? And could you comment on that? And I will hang up now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
They do. They've always existed, and they will exist until the end of the age, at which time God will probably do away with them for good. Not this age. There's actually one more age after this one, which is described in the Bible as the millennial period, which is generally just believed to be 1,000 years long, during which Jesus himself will rule over the earth and have a perfect record, and everything will be perfect for us, as perfect as a material world could be. After that time, during that time, I do not believe that they will be allowed to create more hybrids until near the end, when the dragon is loosed from the pit again, and he will be allowed to recreate yet another army using these hybridization techniques. This army will once again attack the people living in Jerusalem at that time. Probably a last chance for Satan to determine whether or not he is redeemable. And since he is released from the pit, he does exactly the same thing over again, just like he has every other time he's been released. It'll be determined finally that Satan is irredeemable, and he'll be thrown into hell for good. And everyone who tried to attack Jerusalem is described in Genesis and near the end of the Revelation as this peoples of Gog and Magog arrayed against Jerusalem. They too will be thrown into hell for their attempt to kill the people of God. And then the final judgment, and then after that, no more Nephilim, no more Rephaim, no more giants, just perfect peace and a new earth.
Well, sounds like it'll eventually be a good place. Then, hang on a minute, Doug. We've got another break coming up here, and yeah, just hold on for a minute with us, and when we come back, we'll get right back into it. We'll pick up where you left off. The call-in number is 858-683-1309. Press 1 so we know you want to get on. We'll take your questions. The website, www.latenightinthe.midlands.com. And I'll tell you, what an interesting evening this has turned out to be. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. I'm Michael Vera. This is Late Night in the Midlands. All the programming and scheduling, well, you want to be a member of LateNightInTheMidlands.com, because the members of LateNightInTheMidlands.com get the information first. That's how it works. So become a member, be informed. You can listen live, chat, spread the truth. We've got open blogs, forums. Go ahead, post, and get the truth out to everybody. That's what it's all about. That's why we do this every night, because our goal is to get to the truth, whatever that truth is. And again, 858-683-1309. You can also call in using Skype. My guest, Doug Elwell, and one of his books, his latest, The Riddle of the Sphinx. So let's get back to it. And Doug, I'm sorry, I cut you off and you were just about to comment, but you can go ahead if you remember what it was you were going to say. Sorry about
I was
that.
at the end of a roll, so it's probably a good time to stop.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this before we take our next call. Do you think Earth could be some kind of prison planet? And we talk about fallen angels. Why are they being sent here?
I believe that after the fallen angels were cast down from heaven, they entered into the universe and have been using it as a place to hide from God. And God has been in the process over maybe millions of years, who knows how long, systematically been corralling them and limiting them to smaller and smaller parts of the universe, until his ultimate goal is to corral them all and hide them all into the earth and bury them underneath it. Ultimately, I think he actually intends to hurl the earth into the sun, which is the lake of fire described in the book of Revelation, and replace Earth with a brand new, perfect planet to replace Earth. While it is very good, it's not perfect. So ultimately, the Earth is a prison planet for the fallen angels, and it will probably end up being hurled into the sun, where it will burn. It and the fallen angels in it will burn forever.
That don't sound very nice.
Now let's get your tickets now.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I would wonder, okay, I understand that God would want to rid the evil, but what happens to those of us, well, I know we all have sins, of course, but what happens to those of us who may not deserve to be hurled into the sun? We're going to go for the ride anyways, aren't we?
I don't know. It's a hard question. I grant you. People make decisions, and those decisions have consequences. Not the case if you die, you die. So one way or the other, it doesn't really matter. Some people don't believe in heaven or hell or any of this stuff, so it's really up to them to make their own decisions.
All right. I like the answer. Well, okay, we're going to take our next call. We've got Jeff in Indiana. You're on Late Night in the Midlands, Jeff.
Hey, how you guys doing, man? I love your show, Michael. It's awesome for getting the truth out and talking about what's really going on. I got a question I was wanting to ask him about. Have you ever heard of the theory of pre-existence of mankind and in relationship to the war in heaven, and when it started in Revelation 12, that the start of the creation, well, Adam and Eve, the second earth, when earth became in form, that was the start of what they call the war in heaven. And the theory goes, and when I heard it from this preacher, it just floored me. I said, wow, that could fit, And the theory is that when the war in heaven started, that God had to make an outway for mankind to get redemption. So what he done was he made earth come into the form, and he gave everybody up in heaven a chance to come to this earth in the form of flesh and bone, because sin cannot stay in heaven, so it had to come in the flesh and form. And this is their redemption stage to go back to heaven where they came from, because we were all one angels.
People from angels, so I couldn't say for sure they were true, but it's not impossible. The idea that we may have pre-existed in some sort of angelic form, born into flesh and then redeemed, I've considered that. Because you have to wonder, why do we need to be redeemed if we never existed before? There's a theological problem. But that's an interesting idea. It's theologically tricky, and it's similar to some Gnostic concepts. You have to be careful. But it's not impossible, so it's a very interesting statement, and appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the call, Jeff. Getting a lot of background noise there, too, so it was kind of hard to understand everything, but hopefully that answers your question. And we'll move right along here. Now, getting back to Planet X a little bit, you tie it into creation and the second coming, and we've talked about that somewhat tonight. Can you tell me more about that? How is it actually tied in to the second coming?
I believe that the Planet X is not only in the Book of Revelation. Planet X is one of the primary components of the Book of Revelation. When I was studying the Book of Revelation, when I was writing the book, I determined that I just come fresh from studying the Babylonian creation epic, and I noticed that in the Babylonian creation epic, Marduk is described as having a great armor of terror and this great crown, and surrounded by all these weapons, a group of 7 winds and a group of 4 winds, and other things like that, a powerful bow, and a mace, and so forth. And I had that in mind when I was analyzing the Book of Revelation for references to Planet X. And Jesus refers to himself as a bright and morning star. I think it's Revelation 2. I think it's a couple of times. And I think that's what he was referring actually to Planet X. But the most interesting concept I came across was Revelation 4, where God appears on his throne in heaven. And I was stunned to find that the description of the throne in heaven was remarkably similar to the description of Marduk in the Babylonian creation epic. In the Babylonian creation epic, you had a group of 7 winds and a group of 4 winds that were kind of his servants, wind and fiery servants that surrounded him. In the book of Revelation, chapter 4, you have a description of these 7 fiery angels and also a group of 4 great beasts who surrounded the throne and protected it. Same grouping, same number of beings. Also, the idea of Jesus having this long, flowing white hair sounds remarkably like a comet tail, like I described earlier. When Planet X appears, it will have a long, flowing comet-like tail. In fact, the word comet is taken from the Greek word kometes, which literally means long, white hair. So I think what they are referring to in the book of Revelation chapter 4 is an appearance of Planet X as this divine throne which God uses as a kind of a throne chariot to attack the earth. And this is the preparation period. It's a parallel to the Babylonian creation epic, except it's a Christian version which says not Marduk, not any of these other deities. Jesus is the king of this throne, and he is the one to be worshipped. And it's kind of a polemic against these ancient epics, which they raise up their false gods to be the king of this planet. And he's saying Jesus is the king of the planet. This is his sign, and this is his throne. And he will be using it to attack the forces of the dragon, not Marduk, as described in the book of Revelation. It will be Jesus. And so in that sense, and as you read how it rolls out, it's remarkably similar to the series of events described in the Babylonian creation epic, where Marduk fights against the dragon and her allies. Later on in the book of Revelation, you have a description of the dragon and her allies fighting against God, just like in the book of the Babylonian creation epic. Tiamat, the dragon, fights against the coming of Marduk and her array of forces she raises up to fight against him. Very, very similar. So my theory is that the book of Revelation, one of its primary objectives was to say that Jesus and not Marduk, not Ninurta, not Enlil, or any of these ancient gods. He was the true God of that throne, and he and none of these other gods is the defeater of the dragon, creator of the heavens and earth, and the ones who will also redeem them in the end times by coming back once again and using Planet X once again to defeat the dragon once again and take control of the earth.
I see. And this has been repeated. This has happened in the past as far as starting over here, it seems. So I would wonder, sometimes I wonder why be here if we're only going to every couple thousand years get knocked on our heinies. It kind of makes you wonder.
The last time this happened was when the creation of the Earth occurred in Genesis 1:1. Planet X, when it does appear every 2,000 years, appears in the original crossing point where it conflicted with Earth in its original orbit, that is, in the asteroid belt. So it comes close enough to be visible, but not close enough to be a real threat to Earth, except possibly in the end times when its orbital period, I suspect, will be altered, so that it can once again come close to the Earth and cause the kind of cataclysmic effects we see in the Book of Revelation. And, for example, the trumpet judgments appear to be a series of asteroids and comets, basically. I believe that most of the judgments, the trumpet and bowl judgments, are effectively, the trumpet judgments are the approach of Planet X and the asteroids and comets that will be hurling towards us. And the bowl judgments are Planet X itself passing near the Earth and causing total devastation.
Okay, I wonder, why is all this stuff, why do they symbolize it so much to a point where, that why not put it in a manner where everybody could understand it and everybody could pretty much agree as to what it says? Why so codey, as I would call it?
It's coded so that only the generation who will see these things will understand it. It's the kind of a key, I guess you could say. The key code is you have to live in a certain time period and be educated and aware in order to understand this. It's not written for previous generations. It's written for only one generation, the generation that will live in the end times and will have an adequate understanding of science and technology and astronomy in order to understand the mysteries described in the Book of Revelation. So it's carefully coded, so not any generation can say, oh, this is happening in our generation. It will only be relevant to one generation, the generation that actually sees the second coming.
And do you think that we're in that period?
I do believe we will be that generation. I don't know for sure, and I can't prove it, but I intuitively feel that is the case.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about evidence. What kind of hard evidence is there about this planet? We know, I know there's stuff out there that points to there being another planet in the solar system. There are all kinds of different things, but in your opinion, what is the hard evidence on this planet and the damage that it will cause when it comes? I know that it's mentioned in Revelations in some sort, but what else as far as evidence goes?
I actually put together a group of 10 evidences for the existence of Planet X in my book. The most powerful one, I believe, is actually the existence, or the outer planets Uranus and Neptune, the state they're in. When the Voyager probes passed by the outer planets, they discovered not orderly planets, with rotational axes that are perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic, ring systems that are perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic, and moons that all orbit in the same kind of regular pattern, same direction and everything. What they found was a disaster area. Both Uranus and Neptune had been significantly affected, they deduced, by a near flyby of a planet-sized object roughly 3 to 5 times the mass of Earth. They did this not by just conjecture. They ran the math to determine how could these planets be so screwed up. For example, Uranus is actually rotating on its side, almost exactly 90 degrees opposite, different from the other planets. It's like 180 degrees. It's like 85 degrees off where it should be from a perpendicular, for example, Venus and Mercury. It's literally on its side, and it has a ring system that must have formed after a cataclysm, because the ring system is also rotating around its equator. If it had been formed that way, it would not have been able to form if Uranus had originally formed on its side. So and also the moons of Uranus are all kind of screwed up, and the whole situation is totally indicative of a conflict with another planet-sized body. And they determined through the mathematics that these things could have been caused by a near flyby of a body 3 to 5 times the mass of Earth. Same thing with Neptune. Neptune is also heavily skewed. Its rotational and magnetic axes are almost perpendicular with each other. It shouldn't be that way. They should be parallel with each other, or pretty close. Also, it has moons which have strange orbits. One of them, Nereid, has an extremely elongated orbit. One of the moons, I think Triton, actually rotates backwards from the other moons, which doesn't make any sense. And also, we've learned this more recently, Neptune and the planet Pluto actually have orbits which intersect occasionally. Pluto is actually almost identical in size and composition to Neptune's other moon, Triton, to the point that scientists now generally agree that Pluto is actually not an original member of our solar system, but an escaped satellite that escaped the orbit of Neptune due to some similar cataclysm that hit the planet Uranus. So once again, Planet X was invoked to explain why the planet Neptune was so screwed up and why the planet Pluto exists, even though it's only about the size of a satellite, and it intersects with the orbit of Neptune, indicating almost certainly that it was once a satellite of Neptune. So those the characteristics of the outer planets are, in my mind, and in the mind of the scientific community, definitive evidence for the existence of a planet X, because nothing else could explain how these events could have happened. It is therefore 100% likely that Planet X, at least at one time, existed in our solar system. The question is not does it exist, but where is it? So that, in my
yeah,
mind,
that is the big question. Where is it?
Yeah,
I
and there's plenty
definitely
of other
want to
evidence,
know.
but those are the biggest ones.
Right. You know, and I've told my listeners throughout the last couple of years, you know, I'd say probably 5 years ago, I was one of those people who was thinking, hey, you know, there's a lot going on this planet right now with earthquakes and weather patterns, and I thought, yeah, this thing's got to be out there, and maybe close. And now I'm more along the lines of, yes, it's out there. When will it get us? Will it get us? That. You know, I don't know. There's evidence for it, and then there's, you know, arguments against it as far as where it is, when it's going to come. I know that it exists. I know Planet X is a real deal because I seen an article on it back in 1983 when I was in high school. I seen an article that said that a satellite had captured this thing, had caught it, and they found it. So I remember reading about it. So
that was the IRAS
interesting
satellite.
stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And so I do know it exists. That much I do know.
Okay. Yeah, there's plenty of other evidence for it, but that's the primary evidence, and it's definitive in and of itself. So I felt that was more than enough to base a theory on. And
right.
There are actually professional astronomers out there who are searching for it right now. So it's not like it's just all Sitchin-esque pseudoscience. There's real science behind it, and that's the main reason I decided to pursue it.
I see. Well, it's very interesting, and you know, and let's talk for a couple minutes about what is happening on this planet right now. We have had a tremendous increase in earthquakes, and some will say, "Oh no, it's just there's more news outlets now, so you hear about it more, and there's more technology." But no, it's definitely increased. The storms have increased. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on. We've had asteroids come nearby and comets, and we've been told that planets in our solar system are actually undergoing warming. So you got to wonder what's going on and what's causing all this. And if this thing we call Planet X, if it's not maybe nearby and somehow affecting these other planets.
Well, if Planet X were approaching, it would probably would cause disruptions in the magnetic signature of the solar system as it passes through. And that could cause issues with solar flares, and the increased activity of solar activity could create an increase in the heat, the warmth of the other planets if there's additional solar activity going on. So that makes perfect sense. Also, the magnetic spheres of the planets might be affected as well, causing anomalies and data gathered from them. Who knows what's actually going on? But the existence of an approaching planet approaching the inner solar system would have an effect. It wouldn't be dramatic, but it would be there and measurable.
Absolutely. All right, well, we're going to take our last break, Doug, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more and finish up. And we'll take calls, 858-683-1309. You've got to press 1, so I know you want to come on the air. I'm Michael Vera. This is Late Night in the Midlands. My guest, Doug Elwell. We'll be right back. Is it possible to read a person's thoughts? Can we implant thoughts also? Is there evidence of the existence of God? Does U.S. got red rain falling down on you? It could be from the chemtrails being spread in the air. I don't know. Just a suggestion as to what it may be, because I don't think Planet X is here yet. You know, I think if this is real and if this does happen and if it got semi-close to us, I think it would definitely affect the tides. I think that we'd see much ocean activity. And, you know, so for those who say, oh, it's right there, you know, you can only see it if you're in the southern hemisphere, and, you know, it's huge. They put up these pictures like it's big as the moon up there. And I know that's not so, because if it was, we'd be hearing about coastal areas getting swamped, and I haven't heard much about that. You know, that's why, I mean, you got to divide the junk from the truth, and that's what we try to do here. You know, it's tough. People will say, oh, go to YouTube or go look at this. Well, that's fine, but I didn't see them take the picture, and I didn't see them record it. So, you know, I can only take it with a grain of salt. And I've seen one video, somebody tried to sell that. This thing looked like Jupiter was upon us. And right away, it's like, there's no way that's real, because if it was, wow, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. I'd be floating in the ocean somewhere. Anyways, 858-683-1309, that's the number. Just press 1 so we know you want to get on. We're going to get back to it. Make sure you get over to LateNightInTheMidlands.com, become a member, and be informed. And please inform others. We really need to reach out to our friends and our neighbors and strangers and let them know what's really going on. And make sure you get over to project.nsearch.com as well, and the social network nsearch.com. And we're going to bring Doug back with us. All right, Doug, I know we kind of elaborated on this just a little bit earlier, but in your own opinion, how much do you think the government knows about this? Because they got the underground bases, they've got the tons of food that they've got in storage, the seed bank. It's almost like they're expecting something to come.
Yeah, if Planet X does exist and it's approaching, then you can expect them to start building underground tunnels, underground bases, storing massive amounts of food, not necessarily against a war, but against something coming from heaven. And there's the old thing, the old statement from Ronald Reagan saying, what if a force came from heaven to attack Earth? We would certainly unite to forget our promise to unite to fight against the common enemy. I think we've been systematically, over the last several decades, conditioned to think of space invasion possibly coming and to unite against the space invasion in order to fight against it. Once again, it gets back to the idea of a fight against a war against heaven. And so I think part of this preparation is a propagandization of the population of the Earth to think in terms of oneness and unity towards more of a socialist and communist tendency, possibly why the powers that be put our current president into position in order to kind of promote that concept of unity and nobody's better than anybody else, towards the inevitable goal of communizing and eventually enslaving the population in order to make sure that they're willing and able to fight against this second coming as a kind of a controlled army backed up by a controlled supply line and docile worker force. Ultimately, the desire of the fallen angels is to enslave mankind and make them into just that thing, a compliant and easily controlled workforce in order to help them gain their objective of attacking heaven and at the least maintaining the existing stalemate so that their powers and freedoms will be maintained indefinitely.
these evil SOBs who are in control, they really think they're God. They think they can create at will and kill at will, and they get to choose who lives and dies. I mean, look at the wars. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
That was the desire of the fallen angels to have control and to have dominion over others, and why they were thrown out of heaven. That desire is evil, and it causes only descent. So, in order to cast dissension out of heaven, God had to cast them out of heaven. But they're going to still maintain that evil pattern down here on earth. So you can expect more of the same until God comes down and enforces his will also on earth, as it is in heaven.
Well, maybe that's why we got the moon so close to us. Maybe we're supposed to kick them off and send them there. I don't know. It's getting bad, though. It really is. I mean, I'm not going to say I see World War III coming, but I see World War III coming if something doesn't happen soon, and this warmongering isn't stopped. I mean, we start with Iran. I think that's going to draw in Russia, China. I mean, we could be talking about annihilation here with a World War III. I think they say World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones, and that's about what it amounts to.
Yeah, we don't want that to happen, but it may inevitably happen. It is prophecy to happen, so it's good to be prepared for that inevitability.
Now, pretty close to last but not least, where might we be able to find or maybe see Planet X? What direction of the sky would somebody be able to look at? Where should we look? Where do you think it should be coming from?
I believe, based on what I believe to be encoded messages in Genesis 1:1, and also Revelation, I think it's Revelation 2, that Planet X will appear in or near the head of Taurus when it first appears. That is because there's two reasons. One, the first word of the Bible, Bereshit, the individual letters of Hebrew actually have meaning, not just the words. And so when you break down the word Bereshit, which Bereshit, by the way, literally means in the head, or in the beginning, but also it basically means in the head. You break down those letters, they spell out the following sentence. Beth means house, Resh means head, Shin means horns, Yod means hand, and Tav means cross. What this means literally is in the head of the house. Actually, Aleph means bull too, because it's the horns of the bull. So it literally means the word Bereshit when you break it down to its individual letters. In the house of the head of the bull, in the horns, will appear the hand of God in the form of a cross, because in ancient Paleo Hebrew, the Tav, the last letter of the alphabet, was actually a cross sign. So I believe what they encoded in there, in the beginning, literally, which means in the head, is that the Planet X appeared in the constellation of Taurus in the horns. And I don't know how much more time we have. There's a description of Jesus appearing amidst the seven churches, which are also seven stars in the book of Revelation. I believe it's chapter 2 or 1 or 2 or both. And the seven churches of Ephesus are actually located in the southwest corner of Asia Minor, which is modern Turkey. And in ancient times, the subcontinent of Asia Minor was associated with the constellation of Taurus. And in the constellation of Taurus, if you map it over Turkey, the face of the Taurus actually is located where these seven churches are. So I believe what Jesus meant by these seven churches being seven stars is that it corresponds with the asterism in the face of the bull called the Hyades. And there's 5 stars in this asterism, which is a subconstellation, and 2 stars indicating the horns. So I think, and when Jesus appeared in the midst of these 7 stars, I believe he's saying that Planet X will reappear in the midst of these 7 stars in the head of the bull Taurus, a repetition of the prophecy encoded in Genesis 1:1, the first word, Bereshit, repeated in the book of Revelation, saying, just as I appeared in the beginning in the horns of the bull Taurus in heaven, so I will reappear in the horns of the bull Taurus. in the end times. In the beginning, in the end, there's a repetition, there's a cycle of a beginning of things and an end of things. Jesus will wrap up the entire creation process and return the same way he came initially to create the earth. He will come back to recreate it.
And what do you think happens after it gets recreated? Does it stay honest and level, or does it go back corrupt again, you think, and another Noah event comes about?
When Jesus returns, there will be 1,000 years of peace, perfect peace, at the end of which the dragon will be re-released. And then it describes what is called a great white throne in heaven. And it says, heaven and earth flee from before it, and there's no place found for them. And it also mentions that all these people will be thrown into a lake of fire, and the earth will be burnt up. Earlier in the New Testament, it described that the earth and all the works in it will be burnt up in an everlasting fire. What I believe altogether this is saying is that Planet X will return again after 1,000 years instead of 2,000 years, its orbital period having been cut in half. And it will, in a brief but furious struggle, throw Earth and everyone on it into the sun. And that is what the lake of fire is. It's actually describing the sun, which is a burning fire which will last for billions more years. And if God wants it to last longer, it will last forever. So this eternal burning fire is Earth and all of the inhabitants in it, and all those who love to lie. Every one of them will be thrown into the sun, where they will burn forever. And the planet X will replace Earth in its orbit and become that perfect planet you're describing.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting. Now, we've got about another 10 minutes to go. Can you tell me a little bit about the cylinder seal?
The one with the Sumerian cylinder seal, with what appears to be a central sun surrounded by 10 planets?
Yeah, you were talking about it a little earlier. Tell me a little more about that. I mean, what is that? Give me a little history on it.
Sitchin actually found that cylinder seal. It was a Sumerian cylinder seal depicting, I believe, the deities Anu and Enlil and/or possibly Enki. And in it, it's basically a convocation of the gods in heaven. And in this cylinder seal, there appears to be what looks like a depiction of the sun surrounded by 10 circles. And these 10 circles correspond perfectly with the planets as we understand them today, including an additional 10th planet, which is about the same size as Planet X would be according to the theories. So I believe that this convocation of the gods in heaven is actually a description of the convocation of the planets in heaven. On the cylinder seal, it's actually they're depicted in an anthropomorphic way, as human-like, but it's actually a description of the congregation of the gods in heaven, the planets, and probably it's depicting this cylinder seal is probably depicting a conjunction of planets in the heavens, where a number of them are gathered into one place, which, by the way, happened around during the 20th century BC, between 1900 and 2000 BC, which I believe was actually used as a description in Job 1 and 2, where it is said that and also in the Babylonian creation, I think, both of which are prefaced by a gathering of divine beings in heaven. I believe what they're actually describing is two different groupings or massings of the planets in heaven, both of which occurred, I think, about 30 years apart during the 20th century BC. And this immediately preceded the return of Planet X. And the consummate destruction that happened afterwards. Planet X, I believe, actually hurled one or more asteroids towards Earth as it passed through the asteroid belt. And this describes the destruction not only of the Empire of Sumer, which was destroyed at that time, according to their own documents, by an asteroid, what sounds like an asteroid which fell from heaven, and also the book of Job, in which a similar event happened. Fire fell from heaven, and all Job's cattle were destroyed, his children were destroyed by this fire from the wilderness, this wind from the wilderness. And I believe what happened was, right before this conjunction of planets in the heaven, which is used in both the New Malish and the book of Job to date this event, so sometime during the 20th century BC, one or more asteroids fell from the earth and destroyed the empire of Sumer, and also Job, who lived in the suburbs of Sumer, Job was described as one of the chief men of the East, which at that time would have been Sumer. And this is a description of the destruction of Sumer and all the suburbs surrounding it, described in the book of Job. And I believe this is what actually happened. And I talk about this in my chapter 6 of my book, Planet X, the Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age. How the book of Job was kind of was a memory of the ancient creation of the earth that had been encoded into the book of Job in such a way that those who understood such things at the end of time would unlock the code and explain what was actually meant here.
Amazing. Well, we're getting down on time here, so I want to give you a few minutes to go ahead and anything you'd like to finish with, by all means, go ahead. Got about another 5 minutes left. So anything you'd like to, any direction you'd like to head, please go right ahead.
Let me reiterate the names of the books and how to get them first, and we can wrap up and summarize them. The first book, Planet X, the Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age, is about how God used a planet, which he specifically guided into our solar system, which formed according to natural processes that he set into motion in the beginning when he created the universe. He then took a planet and aimed it towards the fourth planet in our solar system. At that time, struck it, divided it into two pieces. One became the asteroid belt, the other became Earth, as we understand it today. Moved to a position closer to the sun where it would be warmer. He gave it an axial tilt as a result of this impact, which created the seasons, without which we could have no life on Earth. This giant impact also created the moon, as we understand it today, also which is required for life on Earth. Basically, this single impact event created all the characteristics of Earth: its distance from the sun, its axial tilt, its rotation rate, and its moon, and also the creation of the oceans, all of which are necessary for life on Earth to exist. And this is what happened in the beginning. He divided this primordial planet into two pieces, creating heaven and earth from it, and in that process modifying Earth to such an extent that it would be able to support life as we know it. And this planet will returns every 2,000 years, will have its orbit modified sufficiently so that it'll pass near Earth in the end times and cause the cataclysms caused in the book of Revelation, and basically reappear in heaven, not only where it appeared 2,000 years ago as the Star of Bethlehem. It will also reappear in the end times as the sign of the Son of Man in the end of the age described in Matthew 24. So Planet X defines both the creation, nativity, and end times of the Bible as the primary symbol and means a tool that God will use to achieve his goals. My other book, The Riddle of the Sphinx, which is available exclusively at Amazon.com, Kindle format, it talks about how the Sphinx hides a mysterious hall of records underneath it, which can be accessible via the right paw. This is described not only in occult literature, but also in the Bible, both of which have a vested interest in the biblical narrative has a vested interest in keeping it hidden, but the occult literature wants to find it so that their great leader, the Antichrist, will be able to use it to conquer and control the world. And this ancient secret hidden in this hall of records beneath the Sphinx is an artifact of ancient technology from the world before the flood, which was so dangerous that it had to be hidden so that no one could use it again until the time appointed at the end of the age, when the descendant of the one who once wore it before in the world before the flood will wear it once again in order to raise an army and control it in order to fight against the second coming of Christ. So there is actually a link there between Planet X and the Riddle of the Sphinx. Both have to do with an end-time battle between the forces of good and evil. And of course, the forces of good will of course win. But reading both these books, you'll have a much better understanding of what will happen in the end times and how to prepare for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, amazing information, absolutely. And people can go to your website and get more information and get their hands on the books as well?
Yes, you can learn more about the Riddle of the Sphinx at www.mysteriousworld.com/riddle. And you can learn more about Planet X, the Sign of the Son of Man, and the End of the Age at planet-x.info. That's planet-x.info.
Okay. Well, Doug, I thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been a very interesting evening, to say the least. And when you get going with your Giants book, I'd love to have you back.
I'll put you on my list, mailing list, so you know first thing when it comes out.
Well, thank you so much. And once again, thank you very much, Doug. And we've got you linked up over on LateNightInTheMidlands.com, and we'll keep your links there so people can find you. And looking forward to the next time we chat, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks very much. Heavens and earth were void. So there's some theologians think that there's an explanation of what appears to be very ancient universe, and that there is a long period of time between those two verses. My theory is that Genesis 1 actually describes not the creation of the universe, but the creation of earth in its present form. This is the Genesis 1 actually says not created, but actually cut heaven and earth. The word is bara, to cut. So it literally says, in the beginning, God cut apart the heaven and the earth. This presupposes a pre-existing planet, a large body from which earth could be cut. And this corresponds perfectly with Sitchin's theory of the planet X striking earth with one of its satellites, dividing it into heaven and earth. This is what the Babylonians thought too, and the Bible. So in order to have a division of heaven and earth into two separate pieces, you have to have a pre-existing object. This was, I believe, the primordial Earth, which orbited in the solar system between the current orbit of Mars and Jupiter, where the asteroid belt is now. And the heaven, or at least one of the heavens, I believe the second heaven of the three heavens, is actually the asteroid belt. And so they're saying literally here in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the asteroid belt in the earth. As a result of this divine conflict in heaven, when earth was divided and moved to another position. And that's why it says in Genesis 1:2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The word Spirit of God literally means the wind of God. And this corresponds in the Babylonian creation. I think Marduk used what he called a wind to move earth to a new location closer to the sun. And I believe this is, and the word moved here literally is the term moved upon the face of the water, literally means brooded upon, like a bird broods upon her eggs. The process of brooding actually involves rolling an egg in order to keep it warm. I believe what God did when he divided the earth into two pieces, he also moved the larger part towards the closer to the sun, rolling it like a mother bird rolls its eggs so that they can be warm. God moved the earth closer to the sun. So
wow, makes you kind of feel like a computer program a little bit.
it's possible we are.
Let's take a call. We've got Lynn in Arizona. Lynn, you're on Late Night in the Midlands.
Hey, this
Hi.
is a really fascinating program. Thank you so much for having this guest. I have a question related to the book of Genesis. There are, between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there are theories that a whole lot of time took place between those two events. And one of the theories is that the first account, Genesis chapter 1, is actually those fallen angels that you're talking about, because they're described as Elohim. And then the Genesis chapter 2 is when...
in order to do that, Effective 54 said you have to be under a single mind. And I think this is one of the secrets of the object under the Sphinx. It's such a powerful computer. It could literally control an entire army of people. So, and Jesus also said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. One could deduce parallels from the time before the flood to the time of the second coming. Roughly, if not the same, pretty similar events are going to be happening. Similar flows of power, and ultimately similar, events and people will be reappearing as they had in the world before the flood. It's kind of a cycle. So I think something still there was probably an Antichrist figure before the flood, as there will be at the time of the second coming. It's a reasonable assumption, I think. Regarding the period of time between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, that is actually called the gap theory, I believe you're referring to, where there was an indeterminate amount of time between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and God created the heavens and earth. And
God, Yahweh, created man, and so I was wondering if you could flesh that out a little bit and maybe give some time, a possible, time lapse between those, what kind of time frame we're talking about. And also you mentioned the fact that we are going to have a global ruler again, which I infer means that at one time you believe that the world was under some kind of global leadership.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could also clarify that.
I'll do that quickly. I believe I'm not sure about the world before the flood, but I believe in order to ultimately their plan of the fallen angels is to raise an army to fight against God. And the only way to have that an effective fighting force against such a powerful being, if not to defeat him, at least to limit his ability to control them. I think that's ultimately their intention is to maintain their freedom. They don't think they can necessarily defeat God, but they can try to maintain their freedom for as long as they can.